Hello, everyone. Today is Monday, Tuesday, October 12th. As always, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Nguyen. Beverage of choice today, just plain water. Today, Menagerie Monday. Bunch of topics to cover. Lots of things happened over the weekend. No surprise, weekend, usually a lot of news, usually a lot of interesting things do happen. So Monday, good day to cover it all. Kind of at the forefront is Magic the Gathering, the 2020 Arena grand finals happened over the weekend. We'll kind of look at the results from that. There's obviously a ban restricted announcement this morning resulting from that. We'll go over that. Kind of thoughts going forward. We'll touch very briefly on sports cards. Just, again, kind of based on topics that did happen over the weekend. And lastly, kind of a big weekend for Pokemon as well. We'll talk about that. Let's hop right in because there's a lot to go over today. So, over the weekend, the 2020 season grand finals happened on Arena. It was a small event. There's only 32 players in the event. As a result, these events are kind of a different animal than what previously had been our traditional Pro Tour / World Championship. These small events, they tend to have a very specific group of people that play. These are probably among the top tier of competitors. So when they play, you tend to have a very inbred meta, usually as a result of some of these players working with each other. So you'll have small groups of 3, 4, maybe 6 people working together. And in that context, 4 people working together playing the same deck, that's 1/8 of the overall meta. That's right, 4 out of 32, 1/8, 12.5% of the overall meta playing one deck. If we move that number up to 6, right, 6 out of 32 is where math is like 18 or so percent of the overall meta. So you can see how the results may be a little bit skewed. We do have to take it with a grain of salt, again, because the meta does shift in such a way when we have these very small events. It's kind of hard to take a lot of data, but from what we saw, the numbers really do speak for themselves here. Omnath Adventure just absolutely dominated the tournament. Best deck by far. More people played it than, I think, like, it was more than half the field. So more people played the deck than all the other decks combined. Basically, it really goes to show the power of the deck. It shows how much they are pushing standard, how much they are really trying to have these cards sell their product. It's becoming clear. I don't think this is a really surprise to anyone. Omnath Locus Creation. This is the face of Zendikar Rising. This is the card that appears on the booster packs. This is the art for the booster boxes. Right. This card is really front and center, and it's a pretty big deal when it has this level of power and it gets banned as a result. That was one of the bannings that happened this morning. They had announced it over the weekend. They gave us a few days notice. Really no surprise, kind of given the timing of the warning, that they were going to do something to standard, just given the numbers and how it shook up. In addition to Omnath, Lucky Clover, another piece of the adventure-based decks, and Escape to the Wilds, a key component of the ramp decks, also banned as a result. I think the direction that Wizards is taking is that they're clearly reluctant to ban their marquee card right away. We did see one set of bannings already. This happened last week. They want to be able to give Standard as much time to evolve, to solve itself as possible, before they do ban the card. This does lead to kind of a weird, really, really small interval where you can kind of take advantage of the market in between. But moving forward, we do have to be aware that Standard is becoming very volatile now. Are we going to see something as oppressive as Omnath at this time? This is something we have seen before. Again, it usually happens towards the beginning of the season. 1 year ago, right, our problematic card was Oko. Oko survived a few weeks before it was banned as well, when just blue-green base decks were just overwhelmingly the best decks in Standard at the time. So in Standard, we may not see the same situation going forward, at least for a little bit. Hopefully, I mean, no card is really safe from this. Who knows what, they may print a better Omnath in the next set, whatever that looks like. Just as a hypothetical, it does, again, provide a pretty interesting seesaw that people do have to play on. If we look at some of the other cards as well, Lucky Clover, Escape to the Wilds, it's very clear that they're wanting to avoid a situation where you chop off the head of standard, you chop off the head of the best deck in standard, and then a new deck just kind of immediately gets into its place, and then you have a new best deck. That creates a problem down the line, right? And then if you chop the head off that, you ban that, then you have another best deck. It's very clear that Wizards is trying to avoid this by opening up some of these cards, by getting rid of Lucky Clover, by getting rid of Escape to the Wilds. If you read their article, they very clearly state that they're wanting to avoid some of these decks just immediately becoming top dog right away and kind of opening up the format for some of the new decks that come in, some of the new ideas that people have that are probably being suppressed by these top decks. That's kind of the way competitive Magic works, is usually there is the very top echelon of decks. These top tier of decks are basically suppressing innovation. They're basically suppressing a tier of decks that fall below them, because a lot of those decks that do fall below the top tier are simply they simply fail the test of, am I able to stand toe-to-toe with the best decks? And most of them simply fold to the best decks, which prevents them from being the top tier decks, even though they may be very competitive decks themselves. So this is something to be aware of going forward. I think that this is a difficult position for a lot of people. Paper Magic events, probably not an all-time high right now. Singles may not be the biggest deal in people's mind, but you do create this really feel-bad situation for people, for the people who are basically buying decks right away, right? Even though Paper Magic doesn't happen, we know that there are more stores opening up. People are slowly trying to return to a set of normalcy. As a result, these decks, these singles are selling. There are people who are definitely buying Omnath. They probably pre-ordered Omnath on day one. They got in very early to play these decks. And now, as a result, people have been able to play these decks for a total of 3 weeks, right, or so, assuming that you bought these on day one, you were playing Magic on day one. You had about 3 weeks of playability out of your Omnath card. In my mind, I think that creates a pretty poor experience for the consumer. That is a little tough, because going forward, as your average consumer, a lot of people may be disincentivized to be buying these cards right away. Omnath, it's very clear the power level is fairly pushed on that card. So going forward, people are always going to have the thought in their mind that if this card is too good and I do order this right now and I do buy this right away, is it going to come back and bite me in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, what have you, when this card is clearly deemed too good and it gets banned and I basically threw all this money at this deck and I can't play it. That is a fairly poor experience for the customer. In my mind, this does give me some hesitancy into buying heavily into standard. It is very volatile. Standard cards, they do have the luxury of having among the quickest turnover in Magic. A lot of these cards, they will sell very, very quickly. Omnath, again, it is kind of a unique card in the sense that it isn't exclusive to standard. We have seen people trying to brew around this deck in Modern. Obviously, with more fetch lands, this card becomes very powerful. It is a legendary card. We spoke a little bit about Commander on Friday, about EDH. This card will find a home in EDH as due to the nature of it being legendary. So there is some hope for this card, but if you are someone that only plays standard, or you look heavily at standard, you may want to rethink your business model. You may want to think about how you buy and sell standard cards. Again, because cards are so volatile, because the meta changes so quickly, it's rarely worth holding on to standard cards, especially in demand cards. You're better off just selling them right away. You may have to pay a little bit more in order to be competitive with some other buyers, depending on how other stores are in your region. Again, standard cards, they do turn over very quickly. That is the one luxury they have. You'll never have to sit on them. They do fall at a price range where most people can buy a standard deck, or at least the more expensive pieces to a standard deck without too much thought. At the time of this, I wrote the outline about a few hours ago in the wake of the announcement. When I last looked on TCG Player, Omnath hadn't really fallen that much in price. It had remained relatively steady. There were some listings where people were clearly trying to go under. When I looked at the page, people were clearly trying to go under and undercut and maybe get rid of their few copies they may have had. I think that's not really that big of a deal. Again, Omnath is a card. It being legendary kind of gives it itself some insurance because people will continue to play this as a commander. So prices haven't really dropped. If we actually look at Uro's actually remained completely stable in price. It is still hovering at the low $30 to $35 mark. It has basically not changed in price since it was last banned. People seem to think for whatever reason that when cards get banned, they completely crater in value. That's kind of just not really the case anymore. A lot of these cards that do get banned do have applications in older formats, in some other formats beyond just standard, which some of the cards in the past, we have seen this before, cards that are strictly only good in standard, when they get banned, they do tend to fall off a cliff. Nowadays we have cards that are good in standard, and because we have kind of these newer formats that these cards fit well into, we're looking at Pioneer, we're looking at Modern in some cases. Some cards just not good enough to fit into Modern, but Pioneer and Historic, for those of you who play Arena, a lot of these cards, they do have value. And since we're not completely certain what the direction that Magic will take, I mean, in the future, do we potentially see Historic becoming a paper format? Who knows? Currently, it only exists in its iteration on Magic Online because of the way cards can be crafted and acquired. It is a little bit different, but again, a lot of these cards, because they do fit in more than just standard, a lot of these cards do hold their value. Some of these cards actually go up after they're banned. My rationale for that is that because there's also a lot of attention to it. For example, if you're a player who doesn't necessarily follow the happenings of Magic as they were, and you just log on a few times a week to look at Magic the Gathering, the mothership, the official page, right? You may not necessarily have your pulse on what's happening, but if you see that, man, there's an arena deck that happened, arena tournament happened over the weekend, and then these cards got banned as a result, this card might be good enough for me to be worth looking at to play my commander deck. And this would incentivize people to go out, for example, who may not necessarily be aware of Omnath even, because I know there's a fair amount of players who do play Magic, who play very casually. They aren't always up to speed. Sometimes you have to tell them that, hey, there's a new set coming out, because they just don't really follow online. They just don't have that much time to play. So their ability to follow up on what happens in Magic is fairly sporadic. And some of those people, again, when there's attention drawn to these new cards, this may be the first time that they've had the ability to actually look at Omnath, post since Zendikar Rising. Again, as silly as it sounds, since so many of us are so heavily entrenched in Magic, we understand, what happens when things get banned, what happens when things change, what's going on. We do forget that there are people that, again, play Magic very casually. They play, we don't see them at our game store. We don't see them on social media talking about what's happening in this arena tournament, for example. These people, they do make up a very large percentage of the player base, and we just don't ever hear from them. We don't ever see them. But for those of us who are retailers, for those who work in game stores, we know that these customers, they do exist, and they are a large percentage of the people who play. And we don't see it, but I suspect that some of these people are responsible for helping prop up the price of these banned cards. These people are going out and buying Uro after it gets banned. These people are going out and buying Field of the Dead after it gets banned, Oko after it gets banned, Omnath after it gets banned. There's really no difference in these. Again, we just don't happen to see them. A lot of us do seem to be locked in the philosophy that this card is banned, it's going to drop in price. That's just simply not the case nowadays. With that said, what does this really do to Zendikar Rising prices? It's been a little while since we've looked at it. Zendikar Rising, relatively stable. As mentioned, Omnath hasn't really changed in price dramatically. It's not really completely trading in value. It may dip a little bit over the next few days once people are slowly trying to sell off their copies, but I do suspect that it'll probably get back to where it is at. If we do see a dip, it'll be a small one. or relatively stable pricing. It won't like shoot up in value. I think the dynamic of paper Magic not existing in its capacity that it has does kind of dampen how quickly cards change in value, especially standard. It used to be very fast. Standard was even faster than it was before. People are always trying to buy and sell cards, especially if you have a retail store, if you're on main events for Grand Prix when they existed. The format's changing very quickly. They're very dynamic. So what's good this week may not be good next week. It has slowed down without paper Magic being as prevalent as it was before. But I do think that with Zendikar Rising where it's at, prices will be stable for the most part. Again, they haven't really dipped in value. I think a big part of this is due to the initial allocation for Zendikar Rising being so heavily pinched. I think a lot of stores, now that they're slowly starting to get their extra supply in, it's kind of sorting itself out in terms of supply issues. I think a lot of the excitement does kind of wear off. This is why having product available the first week that it's released is so important, because a lot of people just want to get their product to be able to play with it right away. By not having it available right away, it does make it a little bit more difficult for people, for these stores who are having to deal with 50% of their product coming in 2 weeks later. Some of the excitement has worn off. A lot of the novelty has worn off, especially now. We're already thinking about the next thing, right? For kind of all last week, the discussion was about Secret Lair, The Walking Dead. That kind of overshadowed Zendikar Rising. And now, from the time of this announcement, I believe when I looked on Magic Gathering, they had announcements that they would start previews for Commander Legends in 2 weeks from today on October 26th. So that doesn't really give us a lot of downtime. Zendikar Rising, realistically, already kind of a thing of the past. By the time Commander Legends starts to roll around, people will already be thinking about that. I do suspect that we'll see a surge in EDH prices happen as a result. Usually when there's these types of products being released, it draws more attention. Whenever there's attention drawn to something, people start really impacting what the market does. And this is simply, some of it's organic, right? Once you have more EDH players, if there's a new legend, right? If it's it doesn't matter, like a blue-white legend, Azorius legend, for example. Blue-white legend, right? It's going to cause blue-white commander decks or commander cards that relate directly to that legend to go up in value. And, it doesn't even have to be something specific. If it's a blue-white enchantment-based commander, right, we'll see blue-white enchantments go up. But even that, right, we'll just see cards that do well in blue and white decks independently of that will go up as well. Simply, this is more people, there's more attention drawn to the format, there's more attention drawn to these cards. People will buy as a result. And I think this is kind of their time to shine. This is probably more attention than Commander gets in quite some time. Again, outside of the Commander theme decks that we normally see, their yearly release now with these products. Again, this is a whole set that's dedicated to Commander. This is something that you open up in booster packs. I assume there will be all new legends. There will be cards that are being reprinted. New legends will create new commanders, which will create new commander decks, which will create new commander trends. This is something we have seen time and time again. Usually when they announce something tribal-based, tribal cards go up. Right? This isn't really a surprise. This is something that's fairly commonplace to most things. This isn't really different. We do have to wait to see how that plays out. If you are a commander player or you are a store, I think it's possible that you do have to find the correct balance of what cards are going to be reprinted that have a risk of being reprinted. It may be advisable to be getting rid of those cards. As for cards that are new, right, then you have to kind of take the gamble and figure out which cards, what new cards will look like and what cards will be impacted as a result. This is something that does happen very quickly. Once information starts to roll out, people will already be catching on to this card synergizes well with this newly spoiled card. This card's going to go up in value. This is something that we do see pretty often. It does help to stay ahead, but because information moves so quickly, because the market changes so quickly, it's really hard to figure out what that looks like. Lastly, Zendikar Rising Expeditions. They are basically completely stable in price across the board. Again, Omnath hasn't really impacted the value, even though it's banned. People are arguably no more or less likely to open Zendikar Rising boxes today compared to yesterday. Prices are stable. EV is stable. It's not really upward pressure. There's not really downward pressure. People will still be getting their boxes in. Stores will be selling boxes and products at kind of their standard rate. Not really any slower, faster than before. So Zendikar Rising Expeditions, again, completely stable, which is pretty surprising. Looking at some of the better ones, looking at things like the fetch lands, looking at some of the other cards, the better ones, again, they have pretty much settled. A lot of them are roughly at the same price as the normal versions, which I think is pretty interesting. But again, with the expected value stable, people aren't going to be opening these boxes in large volumes to be able to get these anymore. So I think we're probably approaching the point where we may be actually, in my mind, approaching a low. I don't really see, again, people opening more of these to list online. So I think as copies slowly start to dry up, it's possible that we may actually see these prices slowly increase between now and the end of the year. Is it going to be a large increase? Probably not. I think that it will keep people occupied, certainly for the next month. Until we do see the release of Commander Legends, right? Zendikar Rising will continue to be the most recent product that's available on the market. Until there is a new most recent available product on the market, by definition, Zendikar Rising will always kind of be the one that does well. I know that my experience in retail, a lot of people just come in and say, just give me some packs of your most recent product. They don't necessarily care what it is, right? It's just the newest set, right? They may not have all their cards they want. They're going to continue to sell that. As a retail store, you're going to continue to sell that to those customers, whereas older sets, it's really a hit or miss type thing. But your newest set, as long as it's the newest set, regardless of what it is, people will want to buy it. So Zendikar Rising Expeditions, one last thought. If you want to buy them, I don't really see any reason to not buy them at this point. I don't think they'll get much cheaper than they already are. If they do, it will be a very, very negligible amount. That being said, I don't think you have to go out and buy them right now. I think that if you're looking for long-term holds, maybe buying them right now, not the worst idea. If you don't really care, if you just want to buy a set to forget, or if you want to buy a set to potentially play in something in the future, not the worst idea. Again, I think it's just kind of hard to see these moving up in a drastic amount. I don't really see these gaining like 20% by the end of the year or something. I just don't think that's how they're going to work. But if you do want to buy them, probably now is as good a time as ever. Some other things relating to Magic over the weekend that were worth noting. Tabernacle had briefly appeared on the MTG stocks list as one of the biggest cards. So that was interesting to note because it said that the new price was $9,400. And when I actually looked, it turns out that some tabernacles on there, you have graded tabernacles. People have images of their tabernacle on there. Those tabernacles aren't actually counted in the listing for MTG stocks when it takes their calculation in consideration. The 9,400 number, I assume, was someone who just listed their card at some relatively egregious price. Without too much thought as to what the card actually was. There were some copies, I think, in the $3,034 to $4,500 range of tabernacles that had images, and I think the algorithm for MTG stocks, however it queries the data, it just completely overlooked those copies. That being said, because it did kind of show up at the top, it does indicate that copies on the cheap copies are gone. For a little while, Tabernacle had dipped in price. We did see a big jump in this card, and then it's kind of settled down, and now most of the cheap copies are basically gone from the market. Card Kingdom, they had 2 copies around $2,400. For EX copies, that's probably like their like LP MP range on those cards, I imagine. So those are ones I see. I think there were still a few copies on TCG Player that have been listed. Some of them do have images, some of them are graded, so they're kind of in that awkward part where it's probably pretty nice. Do you really want Kraken to play with it? So Tabernacle kind of in an interesting spot right now. Same with a lot of reserve list cards. If you look at MTG stocks, we do see that a lot of reserve list cards are kind of they'll continue to appear at the top in terms of biggest price changes. Some of them relatively small, not like large changes in either direction, but because there's visibility on these, because there's movement happening, it does indicate that even at some of these higher prices, especially on the ones that where the prices aren't large changes, it does indicate that there's still organic demand. If I'm just looking at the cards, the interest as of today, the reserve list cards that we see on here, Savannah, it had a small 4% increase. It's probably just some noise. Some cheap copies had disappeared. Survival of the Fittest, Chain of Mephistopheles, Field of Dreams, Pixie Queen, Scorch Ruins, Preacher, Ring of Immortals. Most of these cards, right, in terms of truly playable ones, right, Savannah, Survival of the Fittest, Chains, the rest of them I would consider to be a little bit more narrow, kind of more speculative buys possibly. Some of these that do have the lower ones, on the lower end of gains, Savannah, the playable ones, Survival, and Chains, it does indicate that this is actually relatively organic demand. Again, probably cheap copies are continuing to sell, and that's what's causing the price to slowly creep upwards. Some of the higher ones, Ring of Immortals, Preacher, Scorch Ruins, Pixie Queen, the price jump is much larger, and again, that just kind of makes me think that a lot of cheap copies are disappearing very quickly with the reserve list, so that may be something to think about. It may not necessarily be as organic. It may just be, again, a lot of cheap copies disappearing very quickly. Right? Someone may have a threshold where I'm just going to go buy every copy below X dollars. And as such, that causes a much bigger gain. That's usually what we see in MTG stocks. The fewer copies there are, the higher that person sets that threshold of I want to buy every copy below this price, the more it's going to cause a larger percent increase in MTG stocks. So that's just something to be aware of in terms of what prices look like. I think the nature of the reserve lists is that now talk on it has kind of settled. Now we can really see what could possibly happen when we don't have quite as much attention drawn to it, because when people draw attention to it, that starts to create the sort of FOMO trend among people, right? More people see it, more people are worried that someone else is going to get that deal before them. That incentivizes people to buy. Now, reserve lists kind of at the wayside, not really kind of in people's limelight, not really something people are thinking about. We can see that, again, cards like Survival of the Fittest, Savannah, right? These aren't terribly expensive cards. This is all relative, right? Some people, this might be a lot of money for some people, but both these cards are kind of in the low 200 to 240, 250 range. The fact that these cards are continuing to gain tells me that there are still people out there who are buying these cards at these new prices. We have to remember, at the beginning of the year, Savannah was like low $100, right? Now it's like almost doubled in price. You can still find deals out there. I'm not saying that Savannah is $250. I'm sure you could find Savannahs that are cheaper than that. Same with Survival of the Fittest. At the beginning of the year, Survival of the Fittest was like a $75 card. The fact that this is still seeing small gains, we're only looking at 4 to 5% gains on these, suggests that cheap copies are still disappearing. And with how, again, I suspect that the algorithm works, is that it probably looks, you can set the number to the price on TCG Player, you can set to take low to market value or whatever. So as cheap copies disappear, it's naturally pushing the cheapest copies up. And when we see those, I imagine that's how an MTG stock pulls the data and it sees that cheap copies are gone. So this is going to push the price up a little bit. And that's why we see these small gains when these cheap copies do disappear, as opposed to a large gain right away when you have, every copy below X price disappearing. So when you only have, maybe there's only, 1 or 2 Savannahs that sell a day on TCG Player, well, those copies are selling. It says the old price on here of Savannah is let's see, is $239.40. The new price is $250. Right. So what this tells me is a copy that was at $239.40 sold. There's a copy at $245 sold. Now the cheapest copy is $250, and that's where we see the data come in. And again, that suggests that even though small quantities are being sold, it does tell me that one, people are still buying, and two, the prices will slowly continue to creep up until we see something that pushes these cards down. What that is, I'm not sure. Right now, we're still kind of in the thick of things, right? We're less than a month out until the election. That's really going to change things. That's going to change the market. Going forward, we don't know what events look like. We don't know events will resume. There's a lot of speculation that I think a lot of people will be itching that to go out and play in these big events again. I imagine that when there is the first Magic Fest that resumes, if it does resume, when it does resume, it will be a big deal. We'll probably be looking at like a Vegas level event. But until we see something like that, one that really puts cards back in the hands of vendors and vendors are able to sell it again, until we kind of have this large way to churn through a large volume of cardboard, I think these prices are really, really here to stay. It's simply a matter of us being able to sort out and being able to isolate what cards are real, what cards are going to be artificially manipulated, right? Being able to buy at the right time. For a lot of people, I do think that a lot of these cards, if you do need them, I would say bite the bullet, buy them sooner rather than later, until we have a better idea of what the future looks like, what cards are going to do. We just have to go off of the data we have right now. We should assume right now that we're not going to have events in the near future until well into next year, until there's something that actually motivates people, incentivizes people to go out and start going to events again, start buying cards and selling cards and dealing with Magic on a more normal basis. For now, that normal is probably going to be what we're in right now. Right, if you do need these Savannahs, if you do want to survive the fittest and you're just looking to play, I don't think it hurts to go out and buy it if you can afford to do so. It's very possible that these prices will continue to go up. They are going up slowly. We have seen these large jumps in reserve lists before. It wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people just decide that if enough people decide to go out and buy a Survival of the Fittest, we could see another potential price jump. So it is a difficult decision. I'm, again, sympathetic towards people that want to play these cards. And these cards are probably just getting more expensive more quickly than what people can afford to go out and buy. It is a difficult position, but I think given the current nature, given the current political climate, given where we are with the pandemic, I don't see a lot of these reserve list cards retracting in price, not in any meaningful amount. So if you do need them, I would buy them sooner rather than later. You have to figure out which cards you want to prioritize. With EDH, I know a lot of people, 100 card decks, there's a lot of cards, there's a lot of upgrades that you could be buying, right? A lot of people I know do play cheaper substitutes over more expensive ones because they simply can't afford it at the time. The card that they play, simply a placeholder until they can afford to shell out and buy the more expensive version. But again, given our current state, the information that we have right now, I think it is very reasonable that reserve lists cards will continue to go up, and I do think that people who want to buy them now, they may see some gains in the future. I think, again, when we talked about Savannah and Survival Fizz, these two cards at the beginning of the year, they were less than half the price they were now. Savannah, probably low 100s. You probably buy nice Savannahs for 120 to 140. Right now they're pushing 250. Survival of the Fittest, same idea. You could buy the card beginning of the year for like $70. I remember at the beginning of the year, I was listing them. They were relatively stable. I was selling them in like the 70 to 80 range. They were relatively slow to move, but they still sold. And now we see it, right? We're looking at Survival of the Fittest that's like $200+ in that time. So some of that was manipulated, right? We did see kind of a big jump when a lot of the Survival of the Fittest cards kind of got bought out very quickly. But we haven't really seen it settle that much. Even if it continues to settle, which it may or may not, based on what we see on MGD stocks, Whether or not it settles, right, remains to be seen, but almost assuredly it will settle at a price that's higher than the 70 to 80 that we were seeing at the beginning of the year. So EDH cards, generally good buys. I think people who want to buy them and hold on to them will do well. I have a fair amount of double masters cards that I'm just not selling. I think they're far too cheap. I think that given this nature of cards that are reprinted, I think these cards will rebound very, very heavily in the future, especially if we do start seeing a real normal that can happen where big events are possible. People can reconvene at their stores to play in events. When that happens, I do see a huge surge in demand for these cards again, as people who maybe had to sell off their cards to be able to pay rent, to be able to pay their bills in the middle of the pandemic, right? When these people weren't prioritizing their cardboard as highly and they were selling them off, and now all of a sudden they want to get back in, they want to rebuild their decks that they had to sell off. There's going to be a huge surge for demand again, and it's very possible that these prices in 6 months' time, you could be looking back and thinking, man, I could have bought Savannah for $250, right? The card's like almost $400 now. Completely hypothetical example. I don't know. I'm just saying that scenario is not outside the realm of possibility for me. Moving onwards, another big event that happened this weekend. For those of us that follow sports, the NBA championship. It's been going on. Playoffs. LA Lakers, they won in Game 7 yesterday. So I think it's a very, very large number of titles for them. So it's a big deal. I'm going to touch very briefly on this. LeBron James with the Lakers, another championship ring for him. Now we have to start thinking, what does this do in terms of sports cards? And I only bring this up right now because I know that there's going to be a lot of discussion, where there's already a lot of discussion about like who's the GOAT for basketball. There's a lot of names in the hat, right? LeBron James is just among them. What this does for sports cards is anytime a player wins a title, their cards, kind of as a generic rule of thumb, does get more valuable. A very concrete example, Tom Brady, Patriots quarterback. He's won plenty of rings. He's won a lot of Super Bowls. We all know who he is. The 2000 playoff contender card, that card has, if you look at the price graph on that card, every time Tom Brady wins a Super Bowl, every time he gets a ring, that card gets more expensive. It's actually, it times up almost perfectly. The price charts time up almost perfectly with the day of the Super Bowl. Literally within months, a few months after he wins the Super Bowl, that card goes up in price. And the card has just continued to go up in price. This is a relatively well-known trend. That being said, there's a lot of rookie cards out there. LeBron James, I think he has like 20 plus rookie cards or something that have his signature in some capacity. It's kind of hard to decipher which one is going to do well. At this point, I know a lot of people who are heavily into sports cards, right? Investors, they're probably already buying up most of the cheap copies, but it is something to consider for the future. This is simply another data point that's worth noting for sports cards. These cards, usually they're on a one-way trip. They don't get more common, right? Rookie cards don't get more common up when a player retires, right? That's another big jump in the value of their card. It is hard because we have so many printings, right? There is no one LeBron James rookie card, right? In the sense of there is one base edition Charizard, which we'll get to in a moment, right? But there's one base edition Charizard that everyone knows art on. It's very, very iconic. With sports cards, not really the same idea because there are so many different companies that had licensing rights to Major League Baseball, to NBA, to NFL. So there are a lot of different ways that these cards can be produced. So trying to zoom in on exactly the card that you want, trying to pinpoint which rookie card is going to do the best, kind of hard to do. Again, because there's a lot of these different cards out there. A lot of these cards are much more difficult to pinpoint because prior, some sports cards manufacturers, they had the licensing rights, so there'd be multiple copies of LeBron James rookie cards, etc. in the same year. There are different rarities, right? Obviously, the more rare ones will generally tend to do much better. The Tom Brady example, the 2000 playoff contender. I think there's I think the number on the card is like 100 copies or something. It's a very, very rare card. I think there was an auction a few years ago. I think a PSA 10, PSA 9, whichever the one was listed. I think that had sold for, I think something like almost $500,000. The next lower grade down, I think, sold for about half that price. The card, very, very rare. And again, that's just an example of sports cards and what they do. That's why it helps to be in the know. I think if you already follow sports and you have a good idea, a lot of people have an idea about who the dark horses are, right? Like with dark horses, people that if you could be buying their rookie card right now, and that will be a big deal, right? You could very easily be buying a card right now that is going to be worth $200,000 in the future. Granted, right? Players along LeBron James quality, right? Tom Brady's, right? These are kind of once a decade type thing. It's kind of hard to really guess, right? It requires extraordinary amount of luck, right? I'm sure, just looking back, how many of us in the year 2000 would have put Tom Brady on the radar as being one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, right? With the legacy that he has now, right? Pretty hard to do, right? I think, again, most of us just don't have this on the radar. But if you're into sports, if you're looking for a way to invest and you can afford to just throw a few dollars that you don't necessarily consider to be that big a deal, take a look at rookie cards. Think about who the dark horses out there are. And just see what they do. I think I brought this up an example for, right? I'm a big fan of baseball. Juan Soto, he plays for the Washington Nationals. His rookie card last year, after the Washington Nationals won the World Series, took a huge jump. His rookie card has done very well. Again, he was kind of a player that was, I think, kind of a dark horse. He's put up very impressive numbers, but him last year putting the Nationals on board, right? Last year was the first year that Washington Nationals has won a World Series. That's a big deal. His rookie card did see a huge increase. I think I've seen various rookie cards from him on PWCC. It's been mentioned a few times as kind of a it's on the front page as a premier level card. Just one of the ones that have really taken note. And I think this is, again, I want to touch on this very briefly. Sports cards, really not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But again, this just goes to show that if you follow sports, if you have evidence that would suggest that someone is a dark horse, someone that could be a big name, that could be a household name in maybe 10 years or something, once their season has had some time to mature, once they've had time to play, once they have time to put up results, right? It's very possible you could go out, just buy these cards and, some of these rookie cards, and you'll see a huge return in the future. Something to keep your mind on. Again, I don't follow sports cards well enough. I do like sports, but again, I don't know sports cards well enough to do that. But I do see, a lot of the cards, with so many different cards being released by the different companies. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to just really take a stab, throw some money down, and see where it goes. So with that, we'll close up on Pokemon. This is one of the things that I'll keep visiting time and time again. Pokemon is continuing to put up impressive numbers in terms of the market. Iconic auctions this over the weekend, they sold a PSA 10 first edition Charizard, right? This is the holy grail for most people. This is a record sale, I believe, for a single Pokemon card. Not talking about some of the more exclusive ones, not talking about single, very rare prints, not talking about Illustrator, those cards. This PSA 10 first edition Charizard, it's sold for $220,000. $220,574.40 with the buyer's premium included. Again, when we talk about some of these premier level auction sites, whenever you win, whatever the winning bid is, you're paying a buyer's premium. That is a percentage you're paying on top of what the bid is. So if this is like a 20% buyer's premium, which is completely within the realm of possibility, especially with things like fine art, if it's 20% premium, right, this person that bid is probably bid like $180,000, for example, and then he paid 20%, 108,000, right? That's 20%. That's $36,216,000 on this card, right? So in that range, again, I'm not sure what the buyer's premium was, but this was the price, $220,000 on a single card. As it turns out, the former rapper, I guess, Logic, he was the one that bought it. I think it's been fairly well publicized. He has mentioned it. And this is simply another checkmark. This is their instance where you have high profile celebrities, you have people that have a lot of net worth, you have a lot of people who are worth a lot of money. They're going out and they're spending a lot of money on these cards. Logic, I looked up his page, right? He was born in 1990. That makes him basically 30 years old. His net worth, obviously much, much higher than the majority of ours. But this goes to show that when people have this kind of money, right, people are able to do so. They're going out and they are spending the big bucks on these cards in the name of nostalgia. And again, I repeat this time and time again. And I think it's worth reiterating that Pokemon, I think their IP is absolutely brilliant. We've talked about how well it does, right? Pokemon is bigger than Star Wars. It's bigger than Marvel. It's bigger than Disney Princess. It's bigger than Spider-Man. All these media franchises that we think of that do very well, Pokemon completely leaves them in the dust. And it's not just trading cards, right? People, Pokemon who don't know about the game itself, they may only necessarily know the television show, the anime, the manga, right? These people, not necessarily just trading cards, but people are going out and buying merchandise, right? People play the video game, people who own Switches, DSs, right? People are still playing the Pokemon video games. People still go out there and play Pokemon Go. If you look at Forbes magazine, Business Insider, they have both reported that this year has actually accelerated the amount of money that people are spending on Pokemon Go, right? This is a game that came out in 2016. This is a free-to-play mobile game on your phone that you walk around, you catch Pokemon, and people are spending more money this year than they have ever before in the past 3 years on this game. Again, part of it, pandemic, you probably have more people going on walks, going outside. If you're going to go outside and take a walk, why not play Pokemon Go while you're at it? And again, this really goes to show how stable the Pokemon IP is, how successful the Pokemon IP is, how big of a deal it is for some of these people to be going out, to be spending money. And in the case of Logic, right, spending $220,000 on a Pokemon card. And what is this going to do, right? We've spoken about this in time before. What happens if you have someone who listens to Logic, who follows him on social media, right, who keeps up with him, right? They're a fan of his, right? What's this going to do? I'm willing to bet you that some small percentage, even if it's like a fraction, a tiny percentage of these people, if they see him and they think, oh, I might have this card somewhere, they go into their closet, they go into their attic, they start cleaning stuff out, they start finding this stuff, right? And it's all it's going to do is if that kicks up that nostalgia again, if it kicks up that sense of their childhood, and people start revisiting this, right? What is this going to do? All this is going to do is going to potentially bring more people into Pokemon. What that does for a market means that these prices are here to stay. There were some people on Facebook over the weekend, they were offering $1 million in cash for up to 5 base set Pokemon boxes, right? That's $200,000 a box. When we saw the Heritage auction last month, right? That was a little bit more than a month ago at this point, right? That was $198,000 with the buyer's premium on Heritage auction. That was Logan Paul's box. We know about that, right? That's a big deal. Logan Paul, I think he actually opened his box on YouTube. You can see over the past weekend, right? This is a big deal, right? You have big names putting a lot of money into Pokemon cards, and this is only going to draw the attention of more and more people. It doesn't matter if they're already heavily entrenched in Pokemon, if they already are buying it, they're already investing, and they're already collecting. When there's more people coming in, all this does, it's going to bring more money into the market. If we look at the price history for PSA 10 Charizard, I went back to probably the end of 2019, the beginning of this year, to try and find a PSA 10. I see that there's a sale on December 23rd, 2019, PSA 10 first edition, right? What is the price? And I'll give you a moment to think about it. The price was far less than what it is now. If you had bought it in 2019, if you had won the auction, it was $36,110.54. That is 1/7 of what it is now. That's 15% of the price right now. Are these gains practical? Like, there's obviously a lot of factors here, right? Like, is the next first edition PSA 10 Charizard going to sell for $220,000? Who knows, right? Obviously, we had to have the foresight to buy this in 2019 in December, right? It's been 10 months, right? That is unheard of returns, right? That's obviously pre-pandemic. The world is a completely different place than it is now. But if we look at a lot of prices for similar conditions ones, that same day, PWCC, they sold a PSA 9 first edition Charizard, $6,300, right? Again, a fraction of what it would go for today, right? We were looking at BGS 9s on PWCC last week, ending in like $28,000 range, right? So that's kind of a more realistic level auction on both levels, right? It's not extreme, it wasn't necessarily high profile, but it just goes to show what kind of gains that some of these have really received. I got this data from Pokemon Price. You can go back, you can look, look and see what some prices have done. If we go further back, for example, if I go back one more page, I'm trying to find another 10 that happened in 2018. We do see that there was a PSA 10 2018 August 3rd, $40,000. Even so, if you had bought that 2 years ago, right, compared to where it is now, paying a fraction of price. Looking at some 9s, a 9 around that date, PWCC sold a 9 on July 29th, 2018, $4,900, less than $6,300 if you held on to that card for a year and you sold it last year, right? You'll still see a 25% gain, right? But when we look at lower grades, right, there's 8s, there's 7s, 30. There's a PSA 8 July 19th, 2018, $3,650. PSA 7, two PSA 7s ended in the $2,200 range, right? These cards you couldn't even begin. You probably couldn't even buy like a PSA like 3 or 4 at these prices now, because the cards have simply jumped up so much, because these cards, there's so much demand on them. Once these top tier cards become unobtainable, people start looking at the next best thing, right? What happens when PSA 10, when people can't afford to pay $220,000 for PSA 10? People start looking at 9s. What happens when 9s start seeing that similar price jump? People looking at 8s, etc. It is important to note that the price index on these cards have to stay relatively stable. And I think when you think about them, when you think about them in the context of investing, looking at the price index, being cognizant of how these prices can change, does give you a good idea of where you want to be buying. And what I mean by price index is, if we look at the difference in the set. For example, let's just take our hypothetical Pokemon set. Let's say it has 5 cards in it. We have a card that let's do 5 cards. 5 cards is fine. Let's say we have a card that's $10, $8, $6, $4, and $2. Our 5 card set. Simply based on their rarity, right? 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. These cards, that difference between them, they're going up $2 per card. Let's say there's something that would happen and these cards jump up in price. Let's say there's a huge surge in demand, these cards go up 10 times in price. Your $10 card is going to be $100. Again, example. Your $8 card will be $80, etc., etc. Those cards all have to maintain kind of that generic spread, simply based on what people remember about that card. This is more well known as price memory. These cards have to remain within that relatively narrow band of what these cards are worth. You can't have this $10 card go to $100 and have this card stay, and have the $8 card stay at $8. That's simply not how that works. Once people see that this set, if this $100 card was the result of a $10 card, people are going to start buying up the $8 card until it becomes something close to that spread of that $10 card. And then people will start buying up the $6 card because, oh, well, the $10, $8 cards are $10 and $80. Well, the $6 card shouldn't be this price. This $6 card probably should be closer to $60. We see this with a lot of things. These price indexes, price memory, these are things that happen through multiple things. We talked a bit about dual lands earlier in the episode. We talked about Savannah, right? Savannah is the price where it's at today, again, because it had to catch up to the other dual lands. We have seen price increases, large price increases in the good ones being blue duals, Tropical Island, Tundra, Underground Sea, Volcanic Island. Those have gone up, right? And prior to this point, duels have to go up. They're roughly going to be at the same spread. You have the upper tier duels, you have some mid tier duels, Bayou, Badlands, and then you have kind of the duels that don't see as much legacy play that kind of pick up the rear. You can't have the big duels go up in price substantially without the smaller duels coming along, because all people are going to see is, well, those dual lands went up substantially. Eventually, these dual lands will go up as well. So that's what caused the back ones to slowly creep up in price as well. And again, the idea is that in the context of investing, right, price memory, price index, these are things that people use, people have to think about. And in terms from an investor perspective, I see this question all the time, right? Most of us, right, aren't worth $20 million. Most of us can't afford to just go out and drop the same price as the value of a house in the Midwest or something on a single magic card, on a single piece of cardboard encased in plastic. Most of us can't do that, right? So in terms of, what happens if I only have $1,000 to invest? What happens if I only have $100 to invest? Well, we have to think about it. Again, price memory, price index. How does this apply to where we are now? These cards that are already going to be obtainable for most people by their standards, you have to start thinking about the next best thing. What could potentially go up in the future that would be in accordance with those prices? So for base set, right, we've already seen base set cards go up. We've already seen a lot of people wanting to rebuy their first edition X favorite Pokemon. I had a request from someone over this weekend that said that they were looking for first edition of their favorite Pokemon card. And the number that they were willing to pay me was actually higher than the previous recorded sale for that card by a fairly substantial amount. And again, this goes to show, he said, this is my favorite card as a kid. He wants it for personal reasons. That's it. He was not looking at it in terms of investment. He just wants to buy that card because his favorite card. And I think in the context of, if you go back to our example, if you have $1,000 to invest, you have $100 to invest, buy things that are cheap now that haven't caught up to those prices yet, because the price indexes, again, if we remember, they have to remain relatively consistent. Once the higher end stuff gets expensive, the middle stuff will move up to catch up, and then the lower stuff, what we deem as lower stuff right now, will move to catch up. And then you have the higher end stuff that's now unobtainable, and then you have middle stuff that will eventually become higher end stuff, and then you have low end stuff, what we deem as low end stuff, that will eventually become middle tier stuff, right? We talked about this. We looked at some previous sets from Pokemon, right? Plasma Storm, right? You had the foresight to buy Elite Trainer boxes and keep them sealed from Plasma Storm from first set. Those retail for like $3,000 on eBay right now. That's their retail price. That's their sell price. You have a lot of people who are wanting to collect one of every Elite Trainer box, and their barrier is this Plasma Storm box, because when this first came out in 2016, that's only 4 years ago at this point. You have to remember, people weren't buying them. People weren't keeping them sealed. People didn't put the same value on them sealed as they do today, right? And so most people who bought them simply just ripped them open and just like open the packs, open up the box, and people opened them. And now finding that Elite Trainer box sealed, incredibly difficult. And that was only 4 years ago. Granted, 4 years ago, different animal, different game. Pokemon was in a completely different era, right? Who knows how relatively cheap first edition PSA 10 Charizards were 4 years ago, right? Just a fraction of the price they are now. We do have to remember, and I keep hyping this up, and I feel like a broken record of saying this, but I feel that people need to hear this. As we approach Pokemon's 25th anniversary next year, as we have more and more people putting more and more eyes, putting more visibility onto Pokemon cards, what you can buy right now is very possible that we'll just see these prices completely explode again in the future next year, following Pokemon's explosion with 25th anniversary, right? Depending on what Pokemon does to really celebrate their 25th anniversary, if they start doing things that will really get people back in, we're going to see 2016 all over again. We're going to see these same price spikes. We're going to see the same surge in demand. We're going to see a lot of people revisiting Pokemon, revisiting nostalgia that they did in 2016. That was really kind of the first boom cycle in 2016. And there's a lot more of us alive that do remember that boom cycle in 2016 compared to some of the ones in the previous years. And now it's really, really starting to pick up as it's, again, we see more and more people putting money into Pokemon to collectibles than we have in the past, especially with the pandemic. That being said, I know a lot of people also ask, is this healthy? Is this healthy for the game? Is this healthy for Pokemon to have these prices go where they're at? And in my mind, I absolutely think so. I think a lot of people are looking at this in a fairly skewed way. A lot of people do feel a bit jaded that you have someone who's worth $20 million that they can afford to spend $200,000 the same way most of us would spend whatever, right? $20 million, if you spend $220,000, right? That's 1% of your net worth or whatever, right? For depending on whatever, if our net worth is what we make in a year, right? Average median income in the US is like $28,000, $26,000, whatever, right? $26,000, 1% of that would be most of us spending $260 on a card. Is that something we think about? Not really, right? But again, most of us aren't worth 20 million. We have to consider that very, very differently. So I think it is healthy in the sense that this is how Pokemon grows. This is, again, showing how strong their IP is. More people are wanting to buy into Pokemon. More people are wanting to relive that nostalgia, wanting to relive that sense of these are things I had when I was a kid. I want to be going back. I want to be buying up these collectibles that I couldn't afford or I couldn't buy or I threw out, what have you, when I was a kid. And getting people back in, I think, is not a bad thing. A lot of these cards I don't think are any more obtainable than they were before. I would argue that most people in a position that can't afford to buy $220,000 card right now, they probably couldn't afford to buy it 2 years ago when this card was like $20,000, right? You have a lot of people in the same boat. So I think it's a lot of people who are complaining that it's unhealthy for the game are looking at it in a relatively poor light. Most people who are collecting, there's still plenty of things to collect, right? Pokemon continually releases new products. A lot of these things, the nature of being collectible, the nature of things going on, a lot of the nature of things being collectible, the nature of time basically going on, making collectibles more expensive isn't new. A lot of people are just really starting to understand how expensive, how collectible things can be. And this, again, is something that is relatively new compared to a lot of other things, right? You have people that are collecting baseball cards when they were inserted in tobacco packs, right? That's why the Honus Wagner card, like $2.6 million or whatever, right? Like, people collect things. That's how things have value. That's why Pokemon is as successful as it is, because, again, the whole premise of the game is built around collecting. It's about acquiring things. Things have different rarity. So when we are looking at things, is it healthy for the game? I think so. Again, if we are looking at it in terms of how successful Pokemon can be, how much can we grow Pokemon, look at it in terms of all this is doing is giving more publicity, more eyes on the game, and Pokemon surely will take this in note, and I think it certainly guides their decision. We see more collectible Charizards than ever in more and more sets, and what this does is, in the long term, Pokemon will continue to grow, and for us who are invested in Pokemon, who do own Pokemon cards, who are collecting Pokemon, right, down the line, these cards will become more valuable. Are they all necessarily going to be high profile, or are we all necessarily holding $220,000 cards? I don't think so, but I think for people who are investing, for people who are putting money into this, for people who have been collecting for a long time, this is a good thing for Pokemon, and this is a good thing for your collection, and you should not be sad at the fact that excuse me, you should be not sad at the fact that you can't buy this $220,000 card. You should be thinking, what can I buy for $220 right now that could see appreciable gains in the future? And that's how I would look at things in the context of collectibles, in the context of investing. And I think realistically, this is what we can do right now. And it's just a matter of trying to find that spot, trying to put your money in the right place at the right time. And if you're in it for long enough, you buy enough Pokemon cards and you've been a collector for a long enough time, most people who've collected Pokemon for a long time knows how much their cards have appreciated in value. So, with that said, closing thoughts there. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Edwin13. You can find Vermilion on the right in the social media platforms. There was a lot to cover today. As always, I will try and have some interviews coming in later this week. It's been a little while since we have an interview, just to try and get some other thoughts on what's happening out there. So, as always, thank you for listening. Wherever you're in the world, stay safe, and we will be back here tomorrow. Thanks again.